Have you noticed the pattern nobody says out loud? The sharpest mind rarely owns the room. The hardest worker almost never signs the checks. The most educated man usually ends up employed by someone half as deep and twice as placed. You've seen it your whole life. The smartest kid became the smartest broke adult. The colleague whose thinking could dismantle his boss handed in his resignation while that boss bought another house. You felt the sour clarity of realizing the game you were told you were playing, where intelligence, decency and preparation eventually win, is not the game being played. If intelligence created wealth, you would already be free. You're not. Not because your mind is fraudulent, but because it's been positioned wrong for so long, its output feeds a system that was never routing it back to you. Here's the sentence you were never handed. Machiavelli wouldn't call your situation bad luck. He'd call it bad placement. A brilliant mind in the wrong position is a sword in a desert. Sharp, useless, slowly forgotten. Wealth doesn't flow toward intelligence. It flows toward leverage. And leverage isn't cleverness. It's a structural property of where you stand, not how well your brain performs. Most of the people who taught you about success were themselves on the wrong side of that law, transmitting a map of a country they never inhabited. Machiavelli wasn't contemptuous, he was diagnostic. Men are governed by immediate needs: rent, bills, the next paycheck. Any system that inserts itself between a man and those needs owns a piece of him for as long as the arrangement holds. The intelligent man, told his mind is his asset, polishes it while someone else quietly builds the structure that will extract from it for 40 years. Your intelligence was never the problem. Your placement was. The culture profits from your confusion. A generation of intelligent men who believe harder work, more credentials, better performance will eventually correct their position is a generation that will spend their lives generating value for structures they don't own. The system wasn't designed for you. It was designed to metabolize you. And the qualities that make you excellent at metabolism are the exact ones that keep you from seeing the structure until you're decades deep inside it. By the end of this, you'll understand 3 things most men in your position never grasp: why smart men are the most reliably harvested demographic in the modern economy, what Machiavelli actually meant by positioning, a discipline completely different from working harder or learning more, and the single strategic distinction that separates the intelligent man who dies, employed, from the one who finally converts his mind into leverage. That distinction is where almost every man in your position gets lost, and I'll make sure you don't. If these ideas resonate, hit subscribe for more top-tier content. Drop reposition in the comments so I know you're ready. Let's dive in. Understand exactly what the system does with a smart man. It does not reject him. That would be inefficient. It absorbs him. It creates a specific chamber for him, one with just enough intellectual stimulation to keep his mind from rebelling, just enough compensation to keep his lifestyle from collapsing, and just enough hierarchical progression to keep him believing that the arc is bending toward eventual sovereignty. It is a beautifully engineered cage, and the specific genius of the design is that the smarter the occupant, the more he participates in the construction of his own bars. Consider the exact texture of the experience. You get hired for your mind. Your mind produces value. That value is extracted, packaged, and sold at a multiple of what you are paid. This is not a scandal. This is the elementary arithmetic of employment. A business does not exist to pay you what you are worth. A business exists to pay you the least amount that will keep you present while your output is monetized at a level you never see on your paycheck. The gap between what your intelligence produces and what your intelligence receives is not a bug. It is the operating margin. And the more intelligent you are, the wider that gap is, because your output scales, but your compensation does not. This is why the smartest people in a company are often, in strict economic terms, the most exploited. They generate the highest multiples. And they usually understand this quietly in the middle of a meeting when they see the room take credit for something they alone could have produced. They feel it. They file it away. They go home. They tell themselves it will change with the next promotion. It will not. Here is the harder observation. The cage becomes tighter, not looser, the better you perform inside it, because good performance produces slightly higher compensation, and slightly higher compensation produces slightly higher lifestyle commitments, and slightly higher lifestyle commitments produce a slightly deeper hostage relationship between you and the paycheck. The man who is bad at his job can leave at any moment because he had nothing to lose. The man who is excellent at his job has built over the years a specific set of dependencies that make leaving almost inconceivable. This is why brilliance, uncoupled from positioning, often produces the exact opposite of freedom. The more valuable your output, the more the structure will invest in retaining you, and the more you will find yourself quietly, at 40 or 50, wealthier than the average and less free than the average, because your entire wealth is a hostage of the arrangement that produced it. You have felt this. You have felt the small suffocation of realizing that a raise, a bonus, a promotion, no matter how it was framed, did not actually change your position. It only made the current position more expensive to leave. Machiavelli watched this pattern in the courts of Renaissance Italy. He watched brilliant advisors, poets, strategists, tied to princes who neither respected nor rewarded them beyond the minimum required to keep them at the table. He observed that the ones who never left were the ones whose brilliance had made them most useful and therefore most confined. He was not sentimental about them. He noted the mechanism and moved on. Now you can note it too. Now let me address the specific belief that has quietly directed most of your working life. The belief in merit. Not merit as a concept, but merit as a mechanism. You were taught, implicitly and explicitly, that if you are competent enough, disciplined enough, ethical enough, the market will eventually recognize you and route resources toward you accordingly. This is one of the most sophisticated pieces of psychological infrastructure the modern economy runs on. Because it is technically true just often enough to be believable, and structurally false often enough to be devastating. Merit produces movement. But the movement is almost always inside a system that was designed by someone who understood positioning better than you did. The most competent employee moves up inside the company that someone else built. His merit fills the container that someone else shaped, and no matter how far his merit takes him inside the container itself was built by a man who understood that the highest leverage in any economic arrangement is the leverage of the one who owns the container, not the one who fills it. This is the distinction almost no one names clearly, because the culture profits from the confusion. The distinction is between playing the game well and owning a piece of the board. You were trained extensively in the first. You were trained not at all in the second. Here is where the shame cycles in, and I want you to sit with it briefly before I lift you out, because part of you is doing the math right now. You are counting the years. You are counting the raises. You are counting what those raises actually amount to when you subtract the increased cost of the life the raises encouraged you to build. You are noticing that if you liquidated everything today, subtracted every debt, and calculated the actual free capital you have generated across 20 or 30 years of intelligent, disciplined work, the number would not match the effort. It would not even come close. Something in you flinches at that math. Something in you has been avoiding it. Let it land. Because the flinch is not evidence that you have failed. The flinch is evidence that you have been running an operating system that was never designed to make you free. The operating system was designed to make someone else free, using your output as fuel. You were competent. The system was well designed. Both of these things can be true simultaneously. And here is the lift. The moment you see the operating system clearly, you have already begun to leave it. Not physically yet, not necessarily in your job description, but mentally. The internal permission to see the machinery for what it is the first and most important act of the man who is preparing to reposition. The men who never see it never move. They spend their lives inside the machinery, believing that the next promotion will finally deliver what the last 12 did not. You are already ahead of that man, because you are willing to look. Most are not. Most will read the first 2 minutes of anything that suggests the merit story is incomplete and click away because the alternative is intolerable to them. You are still here. That is not a small distinction. That is the first evidence of the specific type of man you are actually becoming. Now let me give you the law itself, because everything so far has been diagnosis, and diagnosis without the law is just complaint. Machiavelli's law of positioning, as it applies to a modern man, can be stated with brutal simplicity. Your outcome is not determined by the quality of your work. Your outcome is determined by the structural coordinates from which your work is deployed. Same work, different coordinates, different life. This is not motivational, this is architectural. Two men of equal intelligence, equal discipline, equal ethics, placed at different coordinates in the same economy, will produce lives that diverge so radically that people will assume one is a genius and the other is a failure. Neither is true. One was placed, the other was not. And the placement was almost never a matter of luck. It was a matter of understanding, at a specific stage of life, that the game being played was not the game being described. Coordinates in the modern economy come down to a small number of structural realities. Do you own or do you rent your economic output? Do you accumulate assets that produce income independent of your continued labor, or do you exchange your labor for income that stops the moment your labor stops? Do you sit inside a structure someone else designed, or do you sit at a node where you have some control over the structure itself, even in a small way? Do you have equity, or do you have a paycheck? These are not moral distinctions. They are positional distinctions, and they determine with almost mechanical predictability whether a man's intelligence will eventually root wealth toward him or eternally root wealth past him. The intelligent man who never repositions spends his life adding value to structures he does not own. His intelligence appreciates the structure. His intelligence never appreciates his own position. Every year of skilled labor makes the structure more valuable and leaves his position in relative terms exactly where it started. This is why the intelligent employee, 30 years in, often finds himself financially only marginally ahead of where he was at year 5, adjusted for inflation and lifestyle. His intelligence went somewhere. It just did not go into an asset that belongs to him. It went into an asset that belongs to whoever positioned themselves to own the container his intelligence was pouring into. The repositioned man, by contrast, does something that appears strange to the man still inside the merit story. He deliberately, and often at short-term cost, moves his intelligence closer to ownership. Sometimes this means starting a small structure of his own, even if the small structure initially produces less than his current employment. Sometimes it means acquiring over years small ownership stakes in structures that will compound while he sleeps. Sometimes it means shifting his career from a role that consumes his intelligence to a role that credentials it in a way that becomes independently marketable outside any single employer. The specific vehicle matters less than the underlying movement. The underlying movement is always the same. The intelligent man is repositioning himself from a coordinate where his intelligence enriches someone else to a coordinate where his intelligence enriches an entity he owns a piece of. This is not a get-rich narrative, this is a structural correction, and it usually takes years, but it is the only correction that actually works. Every other correction, more education, more effort, more visibility, more networking, without the underlying repositioning, just makes the current coordinates more efficient. The system loves an intelligent man who tries to solve his positional problem with more intelligence. He is the ideal employee. He optimizes his own cage. Here is where the frame flips, and I want you to hold something steady before it does. Everything I have said so far, you might have heard fragments of before. Own assets, build equity. Do not just trade time for money. These phrases are so common now they have become a genre, and the genre itself has become another form of the trap. Because most of the men who consume this content consume it and change nothing. They read the books, they watch the videos, they nod, they highlight. And then they return to Monday, and Monday consumes them, and by Friday, they are exactly the same man they were a year ago, only slightly more informed about the shape of their own cage. The reversal is this. Information about positioning does not produce positioning. Information about the law does not enact the law. And here is the specific mechanism by which intelligent men are neutralized by exactly the content that appears to be freeing them. They mistake the intellectual understanding of the principle for the operational adoption of it. This is uniquely a problem for intelligent men, because intelligent men are trained from childhood to experience understanding as accomplishment. In school, understanding was the accomplishment. You understood the material and you were rewarded. You understood the concept and you passed the test. That reward loop got installed so deeply that decades later, understanding a principle about wealth feels, in the nervous system, like having captured wealth. The neurotransmitters fire the same way. The satisfaction lands, and the man closes the video, satisfied, having done nothing. The system quietly depends on this. It depends on intelligent men consuming exactly enough insight about their position to feel understood, without consuming the smaller, harder, less exciting daily actions that would actually change their position. Understanding is cheap. Repositioning is expensive, in time, in comfort, in the short-term surrender of certainty. And the intelligent man, exquisitely trained to prize understanding, will often refuse to pay the second price precisely because the first price was so easy to pay. He will read another book. He will watch another video. He will keep upgrading the diagnosis while never operating on the patient, and 30 years will pass exactly as they were going to pass anyway. Not every man watching this can hear it without getting defensive. Notice that you are not getting defensive. Notice that something in you is going quiet, because a quiet part of you already knew this and had been waiting for it to be said out loud. The intelligent men who eventually reposition are the ones who allow this sentence to land without resisting it. Understanding is not the finish line. Understanding is the starting gun. And the race is measured in years, not weeks. Now the operational layer. Because a video that ends at diagnosis is exactly the kind of content that keeps the machinery running. And I have no interest in being another instrument of the machinery. The first operation is the redirection of your intellectual surplus. Right now, if you are like most intelligent men in employment, the majority of your best cognitive hours go into work that appreciates someone else's structure. The excellent thinking you do between 9 and 6 is deposited into a container you do not own. This has to change, and it will not change through resignation. It will change through the deliberate reservation of a specific portion of your best cognitive hours for work that appreciates a structure you own or are building. This might be 1 hour before the workday starts. It might be the first hour of the evening. It cannot be the last hour when your mind is depleted, because depleted intelligence produces depleted output, and you have been giving your depleted output to your own life for years. That is one of the quiet cruelties of the current arrangement. Your employer gets your best cognitive hours. You get the leftovers of your own mind. Reversing this ratio, even by a single hour a day, is the first operational move of repositioning. The second operation is the ruthless clarification of what your intelligence is actually specialized in as an independently marketable capacity outside your current role. Most intelligent employees have absorbed their competence entirely into the specific vocabulary of their employer. They can only describe what they do in the language of their company. That is a form of positional capture. Machiavelli would recognize it instantly. The advisor who can only speak in the language of one prince is the advisor who cannot serve another prince. Your work is to extract your intelligence from the vocabulary of any single employer and translate it into a form that has value in a market larger than the room you currently sit in. This is quiet work. It happens in notebooks. It happens in small side projects. It happens in the deliberate development of a body of work, however small, that exists under your name and not under your employer's name. Over years, this body of work becomes the escape ladder. Without it, there is no ladder. There is only more staircase inside the same building. The third operation is the strategic accumulation of small ownership stakes, however small, in things that appreciate without your continued input. This is not about grand entrepreneurship. This is about the elementary reversal of the direction of financial flow. As long as 100% of your financial life depends on the continued exchange of your labor for money, you are in the position of maximum vulnerability. Every dollar that gets converted, however slowly, into an asset that produces even a small return without your continued labor shifts your coordinates fractionally. Fractional shifts compounded over years are what actually produce repositioning. Men who wait for the dramatic move, the big investment, the founding of the company, usually never move at all. Men who move fractionally, patiently, and without waiting for permission, arrive at coordinates their peers cannot understand. The dramatic move is theater, the fractional move is architecture. The fourth operation is the withdrawal of your explanation of these choices from anyone who is still fully inside the merit story. Because these choices, from inside the merit story, look strange. They look like distraction. They look like time you should be spending on the next promotion. They look to a manager who does not want you to develop options, exactly like the signs of a man he needs to bind more tightly to the current arrangement. Do not narrate your repositioning to the room you are repositioning out of. Machiavelli was explicit about this. You do not announce a move before it is completed. You do not seek the approval of the ones whose position depends on your remaining in yours. You simply act quietly under the cover of the current arrangement until the day the current arrangement no longer holds the position of decisive importance in your life. That day comes years earlier than you think once the operations begin, but it does not come at all if the operations do not begin. Imagine 2 years forward. You wake in the same house, in the same body, but a specific structural fact about your life has begun to change. You are no longer wholly hostage to the paycheck. There is something else now, small but real. A source of income, a body of work, an ownership stake, however modest, that exists independent of any single employer's continued goodwill. You notice in small moments that the meetings that used to determine your emotional state no longer determine it in the same way. A criticism from a manager does not detonate what used to detonate. A missed promotion does not shake what used to shake. The reason is not that you have become detached in some spiritual sense. The reason is that a piece of your ground now stands outside the walls of the current arrangement, and the piece is growing. Colleagues sense something they cannot name. There is a specific quality of a man who is no longer wholly captured. It reads from the outside as calm. From the inside it is not calm, it is positional. Nothing about your work has changed. Your coordinates have. Before we close, there is a layer beneath everything I have just said, and you have earned the right to hear it. Because you are still here, and because the man who is still here at this point in a video like this is the man who is ready. The layer beneath is this. Repositioning is not, in the end, about wealth. It is about the specific psychological condition that only becomes available to a man who no longer requires the continued approval of any single structure for his continued survival. That condition has a name, though almost no one uses it correctly. The name is sovereignty. And sovereignty is not synonymous with money. There are wealthy men who are not sovereign, because they built their wealth in ways that leave them terrified of losing it. Their wealth owns them. And there are men of modest resources who are more sovereign than the wealthy men, because their coordinates are structured such that no single loss can end them. The intelligent man who repositions is not chasing the numbers. He is chasing the coordinates. And once the coordinates are correct, the numbers become a downstream effect of the position, not the purpose of the position. This is the reversal that separates the man who eventually arrives from the man who eventually collapses even after apparent success. The man who chases numbers without positioning arrives at numbers and finds that the numbers do not deliver what he was told they would deliver, because the deliverable was never the numbers. The deliverable was the coordinates. The numbers were a symptom of the coordinates. And when he chased the symptom without correcting the underlying structure, he arrived at a version of wealth that was still, quietly, a form of capture. The intelligent man who repositions understands this from the beginning. He is not building a bigger paycheck. He is building a life that no single decision by any single other party can end. That is the goal. Everything else is downstream of it. And here is the specific thing Machiavelli understood that almost no popularizer of Machiavelli captures. The sovereign man is not the man with the most resources. The sovereign man is the man whose survival, whose meaning, whose sense of self is not hostage to any external structure he does not control. That is a different game entirely from the game the culture is playing. The culture is playing a game of visible accumulation. Machiavelli was writing about a game of structural independence. These are not the same game. Most men, including most successful men, are playing the first. The few who play the second are the ones whose positions actually cannot be taken from them because their positions were built on ground the culture does not know how to attack. You are being invited into the second game, not the game of looking successful. The game of becoming structurally unavailable to the people whose interests have depended for decades on your remaining exactly where you were. And you can begin tomorrow with the first operation before anyone in your life notices anything has changed. That is the entire secret. It begins quietly, or it does not begin at all. If this landed the way I think it did, subscribe. Not because I asked, because you understand now that the work you have just glimpsed is not a single insight. It is a multi-year construction, and it requires a room where the construction is treated with the seriousness it deserves. This is that room. What you have heard is one layer. There is deeper work on strategic detachment, deeper work on the specific mechanics of applied Machiavellian principle in ordinary life, deeper work on the interior architecture that repositioning actually requires. Stay in the room, and whatever you do, don't stop now. The on-screen video matters more than you think. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. I'll see you there. See what others miss. Know what others fear. Become who others can't.